In this lesson, we're going to look at custom user roles and permissions. Right now, we're under the Manage tab, People, and we're on the list of users on our site. We can see all three users on the site. In the People section, the third tab at the top here is Roles. If I click on this, I see the three roles that came with Drupal out of the box: Anonymous, Authenticated, and Administrator. You can set up pretty much any user role you can think of and use that to set up any kind of workflow that you might need on your site. For example, if you have an RSS feed that feeds content to Facebook, you might have a user role that only has one permission, which is to determine whether or not content goes to Facebook. In the case of this site, we probably want to have a recipe contributor role for users who can add recipes and edit their own recipes, but can't touch other people's recipes or do anything else on this site. We're going to go ahead and create that role by clicking on the blue Add Role button here, and we'll call this Recipe Contributor. Notice that as with all of the other types of things that we're creating on our Drupal site, we do need a machine name for this as well, and it auto-creates on the right-hand side of the field. So let's go ahead and save Recipe Contributor. And I'll scroll down now, and we can see Recipe Contributor exists as one of the roles on our site. In order for this role to be useful, we need to work with the permissions for the user role. We can do this in two places. We can do this under Operations. So we're going to go to the Recipe Contributor row here, click on the drop-down menu, and under Operations, we can choose Edit Permissions. This will show us all of the permissions available with only one category to which we can set those permissions, which is whether or not the permission is available to the Recipe Contributor role. The other place that we can go to set permissions is under People, this second tab here, Permissions. This shows us all the permissions available on the site with little checkboxes for every user role on our site. As a warning, if you have a lot of user roles on your site and a lot of different modules that are enabled, this can be an incredibly intense page to load. The database query alone could potentially cause your site to freeze up or be a huge performance hit on your site each time this page needs to load. There are contributed modules that you can use to make this a little bit more manageable if you do get into that situation. Since we only have 4 user roles here and not very many modules, however, we're going to go ahead and use this page so that we can see how the permissions are being applied to the different user roles. I want to point out that the administrator column here is entirely grayed out. This is because the administrator user role is a user role that has permission to do everything on the site. The recipe contributor role also has whatever the authenticated user is capable of doing, because any user that's logged into your site is an authenticated user. We don't need to add permission for the recipe contributor to post comments because the authenticated user is able to post comments. If we uncheck whether or not the authenticated user is allowed to post comments, notice that recipe contributor also loses the check mark. And now we could say that recipe contributors can post comments, but authenticated users cannot. The only permissions that we're interested in right now, however, are the permissions to add recipe content and edit your own recipe content. So I'm going to scroll down to the node permissions, and you'll see that each content type has a bunch of permissions associated with it. So the basic page content type, for example, has create new content, delete any content, delete own content, delete revisions, edit any content, edit own content, revert revisions, and view revisions. So that's a lot of different categories of permissions for each content type. The difference between edit or delete any content and edit or delete own content is whether or not the content is content that that specific user created. So we're going to head down to the recipe content type here. We do want the recipe contributor to be able to create new content. So we're going to go ahead and check that off. We don't want them to be able to delete any content. I'm going to say that they can't even delete their own content. So once a recipe is up on the site, we want it to stay there. Perhaps other users will start contributing to it. We don't want them to be able to delete revisions. We don't want them to be able to edit any content because we don't want them editing other people's recipes, but we do want them to be able to edit their own content. And it might be nice to allow them to view revisions, though not allow them to revert revisions, because perhaps they might want to see what changes an administrator made to their recipe. Now I'll scroll down all the way and save these changes. Now that we've done this, we need to go ahead and create a user that is a recipe contributor. So I'll go back to List, Add User, and then I'll just create a fake user. Password is still Change Me. And I'm going to add the recipe contributor user role. Notice that this user will be an authenticated user no matter what I do. And now I can create this account. In this lesson, we took a look at how to create a custom user role and how to set the permissions on that user role. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at how to review the permissions and make sure that everything looks correct on your site.